That next morning, we gathered at a little country restaurant accurately named Town and Country, complete with a sign boldly proclaiming Best in Food. They had the best blueberry muffins in the world, and were one of the few places I knew of that always served grits. And there was a picture of the register of the owner standing outside the restaurant next to Michael Jordan, who stopped in sometimes on his way through the area. Woody joined us as we wanted his input too. We were all pretty tired, but elated. We had seen the holy grail of ghost hunting. A fucking scary apparition. But what was it? We really don't know. One of the letdowns of ghost hunting is that there are no convenient wrap-ups at the end that explain everything. Ghost hunting is a mindfuck. Still, we looked at everything we had and tried to make sense of it. In addition to our other attempts at researching the history of the place, Woody had the contact information of the man who sold him the house. He still had it mainly because he was somewhat anal about filing everything, and he continued to get mail addressed to that guy for some time after he moved. He got in touch with him and asked him about any weird experiences. The guy claims that he never saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, but admitted that he didn't use the basement for much besides storage and rarely went down there. His wife, on the other hand, disliked the basement immensely, and flat out refused to allow her daughter to go down there at any time. We tried to press for an interview, but the man declined for his wife. So, we had confirmation that we weren't the first to experience something down there, but we were going to miss out on the details. Pretty frustrating, but you get used to being cock-blocked in this hobby. Bottom line is, our research really didn't get us very far, and we were forced to come up with an explanation based almost entirely on our own experiences. Anyway, on to the team's conclusions. Here's our thoughts on all the phenomena. The tapping sound. It seemed to come from nowhere, was high-pitched and metallic, and was always the first thing heard each night. It almost seemed to be an indication that the ghost was gearing up for the night's activities, or testing us to see how easily we'd freak. I'd mentioned the fork prongs thing a couple of times now. Jenna suggested not forks, but a scalpel on a surgical tray. Fuck you, Jenna. Fuck you very much. Not knowing what was inside the wall of the house at the point the tapping sound came from, we had to accept the fact that it wasn't necessarily supernatural. But we all suspected that it was. The footsteps on the stairs. The team never actually heard anything on the stairs, but footsteps are probably the most common haunting phenomena, so we had no reason to doubt Woody's report here. The fact that he counted 22 steps on a 12-step staircase indicates to me that the ghost was descending the stairs that used to be on the property, and therefore haunted whatever home or building existed before Woody's place was built. Woody's place was built about 60 years ago, so the ghost was at least that old, and I suspect it was much older. The dragging sound. We all heard it. Jenna and Kevin heard it on 2 separate nights. It started at the bottom of the steps, and continued to the far end of the basement, and looped around in the second half of the room, stopping at the middle where the sawhorses were. There was no doubt in any of our minds that it was a supernatural manifestation. We didn't really pay the sawhorses as much attention as we thought we should have. We thought the staircase was an actual focal point, but in hindsight, the haunting seemed to be heavily focused on the spot in the room where the sawhorses rested. The touching experienced by Woody's wife. I think it's perfectly clear that this thing focuses its energy on females. The fact that the apparition appeared pregnant makes me think that it itself was female. Whether it loved them or hated them is debatable, though it's easy to say hate because of the negative emotions it impressed upon the girls. Do keep in mind that the only one the ghost appeared to try to specifically harm was me, by trying to tip that rack on top of me. Anyway, I left the touching out of my overall conclusions because we heard it from Woody, who heard it from his wife, who could have just been imagining it, too far removed from the direct experience to really be something we can count. The emotional impact on our girls. Again, this thing was attracted to women. It's easy to say it disliked them, and that's why they felt such anger and resentment towards the actual entity. However, consider the possibility that since it appeared to be a woman itself, it empathized with our girls, and sort of, I guess this is the best way to say it, projected its own feelings onto them. At this point we have to question Jenna's harming herself on the sawhorse. Did the ghost coerce her into doing it? Or was that simply an unconscious effort on her part to use up the energy the negative emotions were giving her? I don't know, but I don't think the ghost did it on purpose. So, what have we got thus far? A pregnant female that feels a deep sense of anger and resentment, apparently at herself, who tries to express her despair to other women. At this point, I'd like to remind you just how completely subjective all of this is. Some poltergeist phenomena. The rack didn't tip over by accident. This means we have a ghost that's capable of manipulating the physical environment, which, by the way, in my opinion, pretty much rules out the wrinkle in time ghosts I mentioned in my original post. They tend not to do such things. It's natural to assume that ghosts can do this at will, and that they do it on purpose. I think it's equally likely that they do it entirely by accident, and that it's some undirected psychokinetic energy given off by their presence. Thus, it's impossible to determine if it was a malicious ghost, though it was very clearly a dangerous one. Possible awareness. Again, I believe it projected its emotion onto our girls, and thus, we assume, knew that they were there. It also seemed to be openly challenging us on the third night by taking our lanterns out of play before we even got down the damn steps. If you accept the fact that it tipped the rack over and that it did it on purpose, then it's natural to assume it knew I was standing there and was trying to harm me. Taking all of that into consideration, plus the fact that it's possibly visited us all once a year ever since and probably will again here in about 2 months, I believe it was aware of us. The apparition. The fact that it didn't manifest all of itself isn't necessarily telling us anything. Though a famous ghost hunter by the name of Elliot O'Donnell, passed away in the 1950s I think, once theorized in one of his stories that elemental spirits, having never been human, have a hard time manifesting a complete human form, and either leave parts out or substitute them for something else. In his story, the ghost was an elemental that took the form of a woman, but with a pig's face. Anyway, that's an interesting side note, but I don't think this was an elemental, or a demon for that matter, and so I don't think it really applies here. It's rare to see a completely formed apparition anyway. Pregnancy. The fact that it appeared to be pregnant, I believe, is extremely significant. Was it pregnant when it died? Maybe. Perhaps the child it carried was very important to it. Maybe it was even a stillborn, or she miscarried. For whatever reason, pregnancy, and if you want to do a bit of interpretation, fertility and maybe female strength, were important to the ghost. And I believe strongly that something unresolved having to do with the child is the cause for the haunting in the first place, which really makes it quite sad when you think about it. The seasonal manifestation. If indeed the ghost in question was pregnant at or near the time of her death, it's not too big of a stretch to assume that her baby was born on, or at least due during the early spring, when the manifestations are most common. That wrong feeling. I've stated that I felt unclean in the basement, that something was just not right, and that the spirit itself was unfriendly and dirty. All 4 of the others felt likewise. I think the wrongness was just our human instincts warning us that something funny was going on in this basement. I believe we all still possess our animal instincts, and we just don't have much need to tap into them living in a fairly safe and civilized society. The feeling of uncleanness could have been another projection of the ghost's own feelings about itself. Perhaps this woman got pregnant out of wedlock, or was raped and subsequently became pregnant during a time when such a thing was considered very grave of a sin, and that probably would have led to her being an outcast. She likely would have felt a deep sense of shame and self-loathing, further leading to feelings of anger and resentment that she tried to share with the girls. For some reason, thinking about this, I don't think she was Civil War era. I'm thinking even earlier. The yearly visit. Fucked if I know what to think about this one. Since we didn't do jack shit for the ghost beside it intrude on its place of sorrow, I doubt it's dropping by to say, hey, how's it going? We've theorized that it's not actually the ghost at all, but we were so deeply moved by our experience that our subconscious fires off a burst of psychokinetic energy on the anniversary and ends up activating something in the house to wake us up. Having said that, now's a good time to mention just how much this experience did affect all of us. If it's any indication, I'm typing this line with tears in my eyes. Even 4 years after the fact, I can get extremely worked up about it. It was without a doubt one of the most intense experiences of my life, and my view of the world changed afterward. It had convinced me that emotions and instincts have power, have energy, and that even though science can't explain how, we are more than capable of picking up on these things from each other. It has heavily influenced my desire to continue ghost hunting. Woody has remained in the house in the years since, rarely using the basement. He maintains that it's still haunted, hearing footsteps about twice monthly, except in the early spring when it's far more common. We've never been back. We haven't really been tempted to go back. I feel we overstayed our welcome, and I'm smart enough to bow out gracefully. So there you go. Thank you for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to leave a like. And if you want to hear more stories like it, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you'll never miss a story. Oh, and if you haven't already, don't forget to follow me on Twitter so you can keep up with the latest goings on the channel.